everyone, Aimer back with another Mission Impossible episode review. This time I am doing Season 5, Episode 12, which is called Squeeze Play, aka Sicily, according to the Mission Impossible dossier. So this one begins outside a mansion with a lovely young lady named Eve playing with her dog. A heavy-set thug named Vito heads inside, and the dog clearly doesn't like him much, joining an argument between mob boss Albert Zembra and his French rival Morat. The ailing Zembra tells Morat to get out, signals to Vito to have him taken care of. Outside, Eve hears a gunshot and is visually troubled by it. We cut to Jim getting his instructions near a port. The mission: Zembra is dying of cancer and is preparing to hand his operation and all of the information about it to a successor. The IMF must get the list and put an end to the operation. In the apartment scene, we learn that the basic argument between Morat and Zembra was over territory, and Eve is Zembra's granddaughter. The two are devoted to each other. And hey, Willie's back. We also learn that Zembra will choose between his protege, Carlos Empori, or Paul Corrigan, who heads up the American wing of the operation, and recently had plastic surgery, so looks very different than what he used to. Off we head to Italy, where Willie takes Corrigan into a room and knocks him out, allowing Paris to take his place, after having done extensive research about Corrigan and Zembra's home where Corrigan spent a summer some years ago. Dana replaces Zembra's nurse, while Vito takes Paul to the mansion to meet Uncle Albert again. Carlos brings in Eve to reunite with Paris as Paul, with the suspicious Carlos mentioning that they're engaged. Vito releases the dog from a room, who starts barking violently at Paris, with whom the others expected him to be friendly. Paris, wearing Paul's coat from the airport, allows the dog to get a sniff, at which point he turns docile. Zembra is completely convinced of Paris's identity, as no one else was able to calm the dog down other than Corrigan. Eve and Paris as Paul get reacquainted, which bothers Carlos, and she admits that her grandfather arranged their marriage, as it seemed logical. Vito sees them getting close and darts away, but Paris tells him to stay out of their way. Eve surprises Paris in his room by appearing from a secret passage before dinner, and they share a weird kind of laugh. Then later, Eve chats with her grandfather, who sees that she is troubled about her feelings for Paul. Jim calls Carlos as a member of Morat's organization and says that he has some information about Paul. Dana allows herself to be caught snooping around by Carlos as a masked figure hops over the mansion fence and manages to get up to Zembra's room as he is talking to Paris, who tries to convince him that Carlos is not up to the task of taking over, and he has much more to offer. Paris notices the assailant at the window and makes a shot at Zembra go awry, knocking him out. Turns out the would-be assailant is Barney, wearing the colors of the French crew. Vito wants to shoot him, but Paris says he should be questioned first, and Zembra agrees. Eve is frightened, of course, and Zembra rails at Carlos, who is supposed to be in charge of security. Jim calls Carlos again and says he still wants to meet, so Carlos agrees. Jim says that his group wants Zembra dead because he won't accept their new agreement, and Corrigan has made great strides in the organization, so he wants Carlos's help to get Zembra out in the open where he can be targeted. And they'll get rid of Corrigan as well, so Carlos will be in the lead position in the organization. Carlos says he's not worried about his position with Zembra, and Jim says, well, call me if things change. Barney uses a small explosive to blow open the door of the wine cellar where the thugs put him, and knocks out the guard to escape. Carlos confronts Dana again after finding a gold necklace in her room. Stealing a kiss, he tells her that he wants reports on what Zembra is doing and saying, as Vito reports that Barney has escaped, further infuriating Zembra at Carlos's ineptness. Dana quietly gives Zembra a sleeping pill, and he dozes off as he's talking to Paris. Dana signals Carlos to listen in on the intercom as Paris has a conversation, imitating Zembra's voice, and expressing disappointment at how careless Carlos has been lately. Carlos tells Dana to leave, and she does, seeing Vito coming back to the room because he forgot the key to the wine cabinet. Fortunately, he doesn't notice that Zembra is asleep, and after he leaves, Paris confirms that he'll take care of Eve for as long as he's in charge, sending Carlos into a raid that he's being cut out. Carlos calls Jim, says he wants to deal, giving Eve's dog a meaty bone laced with a knockout drug that puts him out. Jim and Willie show up as vets, with Willie grabbing Eve and chloroforming her to take her away. Jim calls Zembra and says that he has Eve and wants to meet at his warehouse, make a deal for her freedom. Carlos, Paris, and Zembra go to the warehouse, with Paris as Paul going in first, ostensibly to check that the coast is clear. Surprisingly, Eve tells them all to drop the act. She knows what's going on. She knows Paris isn't Paul because of the way he reacted to her appearance from the secret passage. It was built after Paul left, and Paris pretended to have forgotten about it, which the real Paul obviously wouldn't do. Paris asks Jim and Willie to leave the two alone, and they do. Eve asks Paris not to hurt her grandfather, and Paris assures her they won't. They just want to put him out of business. And Paris forces Eve to realize the misery Zembra causes by distributing heroin around the world, and her protected and wonderful life comes at the expense of those poor victims. Paris tells Jim he's confident Eve won't give him away and heads back outside. He tells Zembra that Jim has asked for him and Carlos to accompany him, Zembra and Carlos alone, the two of them, telling Vito to stay near the car while he heads up to the roof. As Carlos and Zembra go inside, Willie points a gun at them and tells Carlos to back away, which he does to Zembra's shock, leaving him out in the open. Paris crashes through the roof, and there's some A-team firing, which goes nowhere, but makes an impressive show. And Jim and Willie head out through a side door and scram. Vito comes inside. Zembra tells Paris to take Eve outside and faces Carlos, who accuses him of wanting him cut out, which Zembra denies and says, "No, I'd never do that," and sadly pulls out a pistol. A gunshot is heard outside, to Eve's dismay yet again. Vito wheels Zembra out, and the mob boss declares he's finished with the business. He gives Paris his ring, which contains a microdot with all the information about the operation, and asks Paris to console Eve. Paris asks Eve what she'll do next. She says she won't tell her grandfather anything, but she's not free until he dies. And then she'll try to forget, heading back to the car. Mission accomplished. I'm going to give this episode a grade of an A-, right on the corner of A- and B+. Starting with the good as usual. I've mentioned it before. Remember the episode from last season, which won't be named, and followed up with My Friend, My Enemy from earlier this season. See, you can give Leonard Nimoy an episode with some romantic possibilities, kind of a more personal mission or whatever, if you give him an actress to play against who has charisma and is just allowed to play a simple role, like Victoria Vetri does. This is another one of those episodes, just like Hunted a couple of episodes ago, where that the incidental character, as I like to call them, really makes the episode work at just about every level. Victoria Vetri is great here. Her presence and mannerisms just completely fit the story and the plot. And I think that the main reason for that is because her character doesn't have an agenda that keeps us guessing about her motivations, right? Like the other episodes that I mentioned, where it's kind of been like a personal mission or a romance for Paris, right? This one, she's just Eve Zembra. She's just caught in this world not of her making, and is just there without anything, anything coding it. And it's rare. It's getting a little bit more common. It's kind of interesting that just in the last 6 episodes we've had 3 of these, where we've had these incidental characters that we're really, really rooting for. I don't think we're going to see that as much during the second half of this season, but still keep an eye out for it, because I think that that's, again, something that the writers are trying to do in order to kind of shake up the plots and the stories, and I like it. I really, really do. As long as you just kind of let that character, be, part of the plot, kind of torn between two worlds in a sense, or, having, their own motivations, desires, goals, whatever, not to be central to the plot in a sense, but central to the story, in a human sense. I really like that. Also good, Albert Paulson, of course. When he gets to be loud and cantankerous, like he was a couple of seasons ago in The Bargain, it's great. He is just so good at it, and it's very, very, very enjoyable. I believe, sadly, that this is the last time that we're going to see him on the show. I could be wrong, but I don't recall seeing him in season 6. I'm positive he's not in season 7. So we'll definitely miss him. Some other good things that I noticed. I didn't notice this at first, having watched this episode before, of course, about the way that the IMF plan to discredit Carlos plays out. It's almost kind of like the layers of an onion, in a sense. Like the first thing we talk about when Paris talks with Eve is that, Eve says, well, my grandfather wants me to marry him because he'll keep me safe. Okay, then, the IMF, and I'm sure that this is just kind of like the way it plays out. I don't think the IMF plans this on the fly. But then, there's an assassination attempt. Okay, well, so that's kind of gone. He's not really capable of keeping, the old man safe, so how's he going to keep Eve safe? Okay, so then the next thing is Zembra says, oh, Carlos is smart. He's got street smarts. He's like a cat. He's really with it. But then Carlos gets really, really fooled by the French crew, with Barney coming in, and hopping over the fence. And then even when they kind of have him, on ice, so to speak, he's able to use an explosive to break out. Well, gee, that's really not showing a lot of smarts, Carlos. And then, the next piece of the puzzle is Zembra telling us that Carlos is undyingly loyal to me. And then, of course, the IMF is able to convince Carlos to sell out and completely betray Zembra. Okay, so, I just found that kind of interesting, the way that kind of shook out. All of those layers get peeled away, piece by piece by piece. And it's a very intelligent and kind of deep plan that they have in this episode. Very interesting to me. Also, really, really neat. I like that the twist, the surprise in this episode is at the end. If you remember a couple of episodes ago in Hunted, and also in last season, another episode that actually featured Albert Paulson, interestingly enough, Orpheus, where we had, again, really, really good episodes. The stories were great. The plans that the IMF laid out were great. But in those ones, I pointed out in both that a flaw is that the twist of the plot is at the beginning. In Hunted, we find that, the ostensibly white man who was with Doug actually turns out to be a black man, Barney, which sets off what goes on in the episode. In Orpheus, we find that the IMF is kind of tracking an assassin, and nobody knows who he is, but we, the audience, know who he is because we see him in the first scene, basically. Here, I like that the surprise is at the end, with Eve being the one, the incidental character saying, I got this. I figured it out. I know what you guys are trying to do. I know you're just playing us. And that was really, really great, rather than having it, at the beginning. You can sort of see it a little bit with the look on Eve's face when Paris, pretends that he forgot about the secret passage and all that. And you can see the look on her face change, like, oh, okay, what's going on? But she doesn't give it away right away, right? So there's still something there. And then, the plot completely moves in a different direction. So it's very, very easy to kind of just forget about that because we just move on very quickly from that. Things that I didn't like, not his fault, but Nico Minardos is always kind of meh when he's on this show. I recall that he was in a very early episode in season 1, Odds on Evil. He was basically a replacement for Dan Briggs in that episode as an agent. And I commented then, I think there was one other episode, I don't remember for sure, but I mentioned that, not his fault, but just the characters he plays just seem kind of meh, and just brings things down just a notch. I don't know why. And again, the other main star that we have here is Nick Georgiad as Vito. He is what he's supposed to be. He plays a one-dimensional character because he is a one-dimensional character. He's just, a thug. So that's fine, but again, not a lot of characterization there. Doesn't really need to be, but I don't know. I wasn't too hot about either of those characters. The teamwork is kind of unbalanced. The team earns their win. Notwithstanding Eve figuring out the plot at the end, that's kind of secondary to the mission in a sense. It is mostly Paris, and that's kind of by necessity. But again, it's certainly not anything even close to a Power of 5 episode. Also not so good. I thought to myself, was this a better story than Hunted or Orpheus, which is the other one that I've compared it to? And I said, you know what? I really don't feel that it is. It's mostly about Eve and her journey, so to speak, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But in terms of an overall story, is it as good as those? And I really feel that it isn't. I couldn't quite come up with exactly why. But then one thing that I realized is, you know what? It centers around Carlos's death, the IMF plot in this episode. There's no way to avoid that. And that's really not the hallmark of a great episode. I've mentioned that many times. When a character must die for the plan to succeed, it just leaves a little bit to be desired in my book. It's always better when the IMF can kind of try and find a better way to do that, in my opinion. So I wouldn't put it quite up there in, the A category based on the story. The story is good, but the story is not great. It does have some flaws. And just by the nature of it, because it is more focused on Eve, the character, it doesn't quite get up there in terms of the level of some of those episodes. And I think I'm going to leave it at that. This one wasn't as long a review as I thought it would be. Thank you as always for watching. Please like this review video. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and please leave your comments. I'd love to hear what you would have to say about this episode as well. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.